all right. It is storytelling time one more time. It is storytelling time. Storytelling time. Tell somebody. It is story time. It is story time. It is storytelling. Storytelling time. Hello, I am Miss Lovedrop, your storyteller for today. And today I would like to share with you a folk tale. Now, folk tale is when people normally just sit around together and they tell you stories that may be about different people or about different things. So I heard this from my grandmother a few years ago, and I would like to share this one with you today. It's entitled, It Is in Your Hands. It is in your hands. It was a beautiful, beautiful afternoon in the park. Now, Mr. Blake is an elderly gentleman, and Mr. Blake is visually impaired. Mr. Blake has been visually impaired almost all of his life, but he doesn't allow or let his visually impairment interfere with the enjoyment of his life. Mr. Blake, he would normally get dressed almost every day, and he would go to a local park, and he would sit on the same bench every day. That's because Mr. Blake enjoyed listening to the birds up in the tree as they would do their chirping and their little singing with harmony, and he enjoyed just listening to the people as they would pass by, to their conversations, to their laughter. Mr. Blake just loved being in the park. He also loved to feel the sunshine on his face, on his arms. Mr. Blake just enjoyed life anyway, all the time, at any place. Mr. Blake was sitting on his normal bench as he does every day up under a cool tree, taking time to enjoy the conversations, the birds, the sun, when he heard noises surrounding him in the park. He could hear someone kicking over trash cans and loud noises and laughter and throwing rocks. He could even hear sticks possibly being thrown up into the trees. In other words, he heard two young men who were in the park being very disruptive. They were bothering everybody in the park. And as the boys began to make their rounds in the park, they reached the bench of Mr. Blake. And the boys had noticed that Mr. Blake would come every day to the park, and he would sit underneath the same tree every day. Today the boys, they asked Mr. Blake, and they said, oh man, why do you come to this park every day? You can't see anything. Why do you waste your time coming to this park every day? Now, Mr. Blake was a very wise old man, and he just sat there very still, and Mr. Blake didn't say absolutely nothing at all. He just continued to enjoy the birds, the sun, and the people as they passed by. The boys walked away and they went on the other side of the park, and they began to really harass and disrupt other people as they were in the park enjoying themselves. And the boys were not content that they could not really ruffle the feathers of Mr. Blake. So they made their rounds back to where Mr. Blake was still sitting on that same bench. Mr. Blake had not moved at all. He was simply enjoying life and just taking care of his business. The boys approached Mr. Blake one more time and they said, oh man, you bet not be in this park on tomorrow, 'cause something is going to happen and you might not like what you hear, 'cause we know you can't see. Well, as the boys were about to slowly walk away, they began to really hear the birds up in the tree as they were chirping, and they were making such a beautiful, beautiful chirping noise. And one boy, he took a stick and he threw the stick up into the tree. And when he did, a bird in the bird nest came tumbling down and it fell to the ground. And there lay on the ground was one little bird. Now, Mr. Blake, he heard the stick that the boys had thrown up into the tree. And he heard a noise from the bird that sounded very squeaking. The boys took the bird into their hands and they walked away from where Mr. Blake was sitting. And one boy said to the other, let's play a trick on the old blind man. And they had that bird the bird into his hand. He said to the other, if the old blind man can guess which hand the bird is in, then we're going to let the bird live. But if the old man, if he doesn't guess the right hand the bird is in, then the bird is going to surely die. Now, the boys went slowly walking back to the bench where Mr. Blake was sitting. Now, as I mentioned previously, even though Mr. Blake was not able to see, Mr. Blake had very keen ears. He could hear sounds from one end of the park to the next. And even though he was visually impaired, his ears worked 2 times as strong for him when needed. The boys approached Mr. Blake's bench and he put his foot on the bench where Mr. Blake was sitting. And he said, old man, I have a bird in one of my hands, and the bird's life is up to you. If you can guess the correct hand that the bird is in, then the bird will live. But if you guess the wrong hand that the bird is in, then the bird will die. Now, Mr. Blake knew that the bird was already dead. Mr. Blake began to wiggle himself up off of that bench, and he turned his head to the left and he turned his head to the right. And then he turned his head to the center as he began to slowly get up and move in a different direction. And the boys stopped and shouted, "Oh man, oh man, oh man, do you not care about this bird's life? Are you going to let this bird die?" Mr. Blake just kept walking slowly away. And then Mr. Blake, he turned around with his head in the direction of where the boys were standing. And he said to both of the boys, "That bird's life is in your hands." The boys were very shocked, and they could not understand. How did Mr. Blake know that the bird was already dead? He's blind. He couldn't have known. As Mr. Blake walked slowly away, he turned back one more time in that direction to where he thought the boys were still standing. And he said, "Surely I am visually impaired, but my ears still work. That bird's life, boys, is in your hands." The same statement that Mr. Blake told the boys about the bird, I ask you today. With all of the world issues that we're facing right now in the universe, so many issues are in our hands. The question to you today is, what are you going to do about it? It's in your hands. Until next time, I'll see you again for storytelling time. Goodbye now.